A woman's fingers tremble as she adjusts her headscarf in a Tehran mirror, knowing that one strand of visible hair could mean prison, flogging, or worse. In 1979, Iran's Islamic Revolution promised freedom from tyranny. But what followed was something far more sinister. A theocracy that didn't just demand obedience, but claimed ownership of every soul within its borders. Children were handed plastic keys and told they were tickets to paradise before being sent to walk through minefields, while mothers screamed as their sons and daughters vanished into prisons where over 30,000 political prisoners were executed in a single summer. What began as a revolution for liberation became a machinery of systematic oppression that still grips Iran's people today, turning everyday existence into a minefield of religious law where the state watches, listens, and punishes with brutal precision. The silent war began not with bombs, but with fabric and fear. Women woke up one morning in 1979 to discover their bodies had become battlefields. The hijab wasn't optional anymore. It was mandatory, enforceable, punishable by law. Morality police appeared on street corners like shadows, watching, waiting. Women who had marched for revolution now found themselves arrested for showing too much hair. Lipstick became rebellion. Laughter in public drew suspicion. The regime called it Islamic law, but it was control dressed in religious clothing. Men and women couldn't sit together in buses anymore. Beaches were segregated. Universities installed barriers down the middle of classrooms. Couples holding hands risked arrest. The state didn't just separate genders, it criminalized natural human connection. Music vanished from radio stations. Dancing became illegal. Western books disappeared from shelves. The regime rewrote textbooks, erased pre-Islamic history, and told children their parents' generation had lived in ignorance. Every aspect of daily life, what people wore, what they read, who they loved, how they laughed, became subject to religious inspection. Iran's people discovered that freedom doesn't die in explosions. It suffocates slowly, one new rule at a time. Revolution's promise burned bright in 1978. Millions filled Tehran's streets demanding freedom from the Shah's brutal regime. His secret police had tortured dissidents in underground cells for decades. His lavish parties mocked families who couldn't afford bread. He forced Western culture down Iranian throats while crushing anyone who questioned his power. When Ayatollah Khamenei promised justice, dignity, and an end to oppression, Iranians believed him. Students who wanted democracy marched alongside clerics who wanted religious law. Leftists, liberals, and conservatives united against their common enemy. Women protested in the streets, some wearing hijabs, others in modern dress, all demanding change. The Shah fled in January 1979. Khamenei returned from exile to crowds of millions. Iran erupted in celebration. They thought they had won their freedom. They had no idea they just traded one dictator for something far worse. The Great Purge came swiftly. Khamenei turned on his allies before the celebration ended. The leftists, intellectuals, and secular activists who had fought beside him discovered they'd been useful tools. Nothing more. Revolutionary courts appeared overnight, conducting trials that lasted minutes. Executions followed within hours. Students who had demanded democracy found themselves dragged from university classrooms. Professors who taught Western philosophy vanished into prisons. In 1980, Khamenei shut down every university in Iran for 2 years, what he called the Cultural Revolution. Thousands of students and faculty were expelled, arrested, or killed. The regime purged textbooks, rewrote curricula, and reopened campuses as indoctrination centers. The executions became public spectacles. Revolutionary guards hauled prisoners onto rooftops and hanged them from construction cranes while crowds gathered below. Bodies swung above Tehran's streets for days as warnings. Former allies, communists, socialists, secular nationalists were labeled enemies of Islam and eliminated systematically. Women who had marched without hijabs during the revolution now faced arrest for the same act. The regime's message was clear. The revolution belonged to Khamenei alone. Everyone else had simply been pawns in his game for absolute power. God's Republic wasn't just a government, it was a theological dictatorship built on Vilayat al-Faqih, the doctrine that placed supreme religious authority above all else. Khomeini declared himself God's representative on earth. His word became law. His interpretation of Islam became the only acceptable truth. The Basij formed the regime's enforcement arm. Volunteer militias who patrolled neighborhoods, monitored mosques, and reported dissent. They weren't professional soldiers, but neighbors turned informants. Shopkeepers turned enforcers. Trust evaporated from Iranian society. Spiritual purity laws invaded every corner of existence. The regime banned Western music, burned books, and destroyed satellite dishes. Alcohol became punishable by lashing. Adultery meant stoning. Apostasy carried a death sentence. The state didn't just control actions, it claimed ownership of thoughts, beliefs, and souls. Iran became a prison where the bars were made of religious law, and the guards were everywhere. The killing fields of 1988 remain Iran's darkest secret, a genocide the regime still refuses to acknowledge. That summer, Khomeini issued a fatwa ordering the execution of all political prisoners who refused to renounce their beliefs. Death commissions formed in prisons across Iran, conducting trials that lasted minutes. 3 questions decided everything. Are you Muslim? Do you accept the Islamic Republic? Will you denounce your organization? Wrong answers meant immediate execution. Prisoners were hanged in groups, sometimes dozens per day. Guards loaded bodies onto trucks like cargo and dumped them in mass graves. Estimates suggest between 4,000 and 30,000 people died in just months. Teachers, students, nurses, factory workers. Some were teenagers. Many had already served years in prison for crimes like distributing pamphlets or attending protests. Families received no notification. No bodies were returned. Mothers searching for their children were told nothing or threatened with arrest. The regime forbade mourning. Even placing flowers on suspected graves could mean imprisonment. Iran's killing fields still hold thousands of unidentified bodies, while survivors carry memories the government demands they forget. The massacres proved the regime's willingness to commit mass murder against its own people. Children of paradise, that's what the regime called them. Boys as young as 12 were given plastic keys and told they unlocked the gates of heaven. Then, they were sent into minefields ahead of Iranian troops during the Iran-Iraq War. The regime recruited children from poor families with promises of martyrdom and eternal glory. Teachers pulled students from classrooms. Clerics visited villages offering money to parents who donated their sons to God's army. Thousands of boys wrapped red bandanas around their heads and marched toward Iraqi positions in human wave attacks. They stepped on mines. They absorbed machine gun fire. They died clearing paths for soldiers who followed behind. The regime celebrated their deaths as holy sacrifice, printing their photos on posters, naming streets after child martyrs, and telling younger brothers they should be jealous of siblings who reached paradise first. Iran turned childhood into a weapon. Modern darkness proves the regime hasn't softened. It simply evolved its methods of control. Evin Prison still operates in northern Tehran, its torture chambers filled with political prisoners, journalists, and activists. Interrogators use white torture now. Sensory deprivation, psychological manipulation, forced confessions filmed for state television. Bodies show fewer marks, but minds break just as completely. Public executions continue. Construction cranes still serve as gallows in city squares. The regime hangs people for drug offenses, homosexuality, and blasphemy. Crimes defined so broadly that almost anything qualifies. Iran executes more people per capita than any nation except China. Digital repression has become the regime's newest weapon. During the 2019 protests, authorities shut down the internet entirely, cutting 80 million people off from the world. They arrested thousands in the darkness. Security forces killed over 1,500 protesters in days, shooting them in the streets while the world couldn't watch. 70% of Iranians were born after 1979. They've never known freedom. They live in suspended mourning, waiting for a revolution that promised liberation but delivered only generations of systematic horror that continues to this day.